I discovered one thing when I was a little boy. I was banging on my parents' piano. It was a bad piano, so no matter how well I studied, it would never sound like a good instrument. And one day I was playing, and by accident, trying to play, and I'm suddenly, whoa! I accidentally hit the C major chord. And for the next year, I'd come to the piano, pick it out again, and play entire symphonies of that. The happy chord, that's what I called it. And one day, as I was playing it, a year later, this happened. Oh! And I realized, oh, it's a sad chord. And that shift from happy to sad is all it is. That's my entire life. Is shifting the pendulum from one side to the other and explaining details of story, details of feelings, details of your life from one little phrase that might speak straight to the heart.
For example, this is the film that's generated right from the film house, right, full size, put on the light table, and for each color, you have to cut a film positive by hand with this two-part film, Amberwood, like a stripping film, right? Then you take this and you expose it to light against like an emulsion screen stencil. You make a stencil, basically. You make a negative stencil, and then when they print the color through that, you get the positive print, right? So it's like you had to cut one separation or generate one separation for each solid color.
Which are some of your favorite posters and why?
I don't know, I'm into this, I like the stuff with the rabbits on it. I'm into the rabbits. And I'm also into the really sort of artsy, like the mouse stuff or the Clint Eastwood stuff. That's the kind of stuff I do for the Asian market. You know, they're just like really simple, because they're just into the fact of the texture of the silk screen and all that kind of stuff. Sort of real political content. Personally, I like those the best.
So, how long did it take to actually be able to like make a living off of this type of work?
I don't know. After I got serious about it, about 2 years. But then again, I don't have a thing like I'll do work. I'll do anything. You know, it's like someone wants to pay me. You know, I do for it. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't have a problem doing commercial work. Like a lot of people I know do. Here's a book.
Oh, thank you so much.
You know, a lot of people are like, well, you work for the counterculture, so you're f***ed if you like do that Nike job. The way I look at it is like Nike wants to throw down 40 grand. I'm doing it.
Good morning, crew, and welcome aboard the African Queen Jungle Cruise. My name's Charlie, and I'll be your captain on this voyage through darkest Africa. Well, Mr. Frisky was my first Bond, and that came with Uncle Stinky.
Now, I want to know where you get these names.
Mr. Frisky was... I type up lots of words in the fonts and see how they look, that some words look better than other words in any given font. And Mr. Frisky is just something that kind of came up. I like the word frisky. And I like the word Mr. But Mr. Frisky was actually a racehorse. He was the runner-up in the 1991 Kentucky Derby. Here's one of the weeklies from the Twin Cities here. That's Lambratista. People have the power. And that's on the back cover of Pulse magazine. And there's my Font Liquor Store for their logo.
Most of these you just happen to pass them by and realize, oh, that's my font.
Yeah, them we actually traded fonts for advertising. But they use them all the time. It's real nice. Here's the Taco Bell cup that had Mr. Frisky on it. This was Halloween 1996. And that was just on every nacho box, taco wrapper, burrito wrapper, taco bag. Everything had Mr. Frisky on it. But then also there's McDonald's, the McSalad Shaker, which allows you to... it's got a lid, so you put a salad in there, and then you put your dressing in there and shake it up, and you can get a little bit of fat on every piece of lettuce, thanks to Mr. Frisky and McDonald's. And this one, that's probably the one that's the most everywhere. Mr. Frisky again for the word grape in Welch's sparkling grape soda. And that's sparkling strawberry soda too.
So, since we've never actually seen you live, how do you deal with the live performance then? How does that work?
We have a lot of the computer-generated stuff, like the sequences and the drum loops we have on hard disk, and then basically it's live musicians playing on top of it. Because when I make my own records, it's just me alone in my studio, you know, writing the songs, playing the instruments, doing the production and engineering. But that would be pretty boring live.
Right,
Just
right.
one person on stage pushing buttons, and you know. So this way I have a drummer, I have a bass player, and I have a keyboard player who also does turntables. And I play guitar and keyboards and percussion and vocals. But I remember a few years ago, someone had sampled one of my songs and written their own song based around it, and my managers came to me and they're like, "Oh, we should sue them, we should sue them." I was like, "No, we should just leave it alone, you know, don't worry about it, it's not..." And also this was like a little dance record, you know, it's like they were going to maybe sell 10,000 copies of it. And I was like, just don't worry about it. You know, if Puff Daddy sampled one of my records and wrote his own song around it, then, you know, I'd be thrilled to sue him. But if it's some bedroom musician or some small dance producer who's just making 5,000 or 10,000 copies, again, I'm very flattered that they would choose to sample my records.
You know.
This is sort of mean, but like, okay, so say with the Rosie O'Donnell example, I mean, you really could make her look 100 pounds lighter and
absolutely.
make it look natural.
Absolutely.
Like,
Sure.
if you hadn't seen her before, you could never tell.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
So is there anything you feel like Photoshop can't do?
It's just really, it's Photoshop, and it's the person. You know, I don't want to toot my own horn, but it's basically, it's what you do with it. It's how much time you spend at it. It's, you know, there's especially when you start getting like real in-depth, like, you know, changing people. A lot of it is about, besides using the tools correctly, a lot of it's about having a good sense of proportion and making things feel real.
It was basically just a little publicity photo.
It was a little publicity photo,
Uh-huh.
and then sometimes they'll even run things that are like paparazzi shots. So these are usually tough because not all the time, the celebrity doesn't always agree to do it. So that's why they have to go, you know, it's either for cost to save money to schedule a celebrity shoot, or the celebrity's not into it and they want to have the cover anyway. So this, you know, her head on the shot was like this big, like smaller than the size of a 35 millimeter, and then basically to take that, blow it up to a full cover and have it look as good as possible is no joke. There's a lot of little, you know, going in there. And
So did you have a slide or a negative or?
this one I had a dupe. I had a dupe of a Fuji print, but that wasn't good enough. I finally scanned the original Fuji print who the photographer had retouched. So on top of, so I'm scanning in a retouched small picture where I have to like just do major alterations as far as just getting the most out of it, you know. So there was a lot of like redrawing of the eyes, of like the eyebrows, the eyelashes, doing a lot of channel mixing in Photoshop too, because the blacks were really blocked up. It just kind of looked like, you know, like heavy mascara around her eyes. Like just really couldn't see any definition at all. So just going in there and just like a lot of, you know, time consuming, just going in there and trying to maximize a lot of the stuff.
The whole time I was on a PC, I still never really quite got used to it. One of the things that, from just a reality standpoint, why I never got used to it was, one thing I always found strange with a PC is I couldn't ever, it's not a mechanic's car. You can't ever go and say, I know there's something wrong with it, I'll just take this out and we'll see what happens. There's so many things that have been installed that you'll never know what was there, and you feel like you're not really in touch with the machine, whereas on a Mac you really feel like you're in control of what you're doing to it.
You mean it's sort of like an old Triumph?
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of get in there and pull out the spark plug and go, no, the engine's not working, and put them back.
The first music I made was with a 2-track tape recorder and a couple of monophonic synthesizers, one of which I built from a kit in the back of a magazine. And you know, because there was really no way to sequence this stuff to do it automatically, I'd have to program, you know, a kick drum, and I'd sit there going, and then I'd program a snare and put it on the second track and go, and this was not very in time and very laborious to program. And so I happened to be out one night in a club,
and I was watching these red and green lights flashing on the dance floor. I thought, how do they do that? Because they're in time. And I went to the DJ booth and I found there was this little lighting console box that was programmable to sequence these lights, and it had been designed for Tangerine Dream. And I figured out it must be just putting out positive and negative voltages. So if I could just tune the voltages right, I could get these to play my synthesizers instead of doing it by hand. So the long and the short of it is that the drums on She Blinded Me with Science are played by a disco lighting console.
The kind of work that I do is applicable to any kind of film. Mostly people think of special effects as being spaceships and sort of magical kind of energy force field kind of things, or things that are obviously effects. And the kind of work I do is to be as invisible as possible. So it's quite often that the stuff that I do will be in, like, Angela's Ashes. So with the same camera, I just set it up and actually shot a fairy coming into frame and going out on the other side, and I stabilized it. So then I took the results of that and brought it into After Effects and boosted the contrast on it, and then I made it into a texture map and then mapped it onto the side of my miniature, or my model, and then looped it. So that worked out pretty good. So that's the final shot there.
The first guy that I knew who had a Mac was this guy, Gary Cosimini, who now works at Adobe. He was at the New York Times, so it had to be... When did the Mac come out? 84? It had to be 84. It could have been early 85. I left the Times in May, but I think it was the end of 84. And they were very suspicious at the newspaper of somebody bringing their own personal computer in to do work for the newspaper. The IT guys were sort of like a classic thing. And I remember he took it home every night. He had one of those carrying cases for it, and I remember looking out the window, and he was going down the sidewalk carrying his Macintosh, thinking how odd it was that somebody was carrying their computer home with them, because, you know, I was still in the idea that computers were big.
I was reading an article, an old interview with you, and in passing you mentioned something about dedicating too much or never allow space to graphics that don't have editorial content, a graphic that doesn't have an editorial purpose.
Yeah,
I was wondering if you could explain what you mean by, like,
well,
what would be an example of a graphic that doesn't have editorial content and a graphic that does?
It's pretty easy to find examples of graphics that don't have editorial content. I just look at almost any monthly magazine, at any illustration in the magazine. They're pretty vapid. The photography is much the same way. Like you look at a trade, what is the picture really telling us? Now, is it any better than the passport picture if it's a business guy? You know, I don't know. There should be some kind of information. You should have an idea if you're running a portrait of somebody you're writing a story about in your publication, or putting a picture up on your website. What is it saying? And what's the message? What's the meaning? What kind of person is that?